Hey guys, Brett at Russell Marine Products here with John, and today we're going to talk about what is dedicated power and what that looks like running that in your boat. So stay tuned.
All right guys, so we get this question quite often about running dedicated power. You're upgrading your graphs, you're adding forward-facing sonar, and power is going to be a big deal. We want to make sure that we get sufficient power up to the unit. So we are really big on running 10 gauge wire. We're running marine grade wire in these boats. As you can see there, this is what it looks like. You have the positive and the negative all wrapped up in this protective sheathing there. So when you purchase this stuff, it's already going to come rigged this way. You've got both wires together. That actually does make it a little bit easier to run through the boat. If you go get some regular, house wire, it's going to be much stiffer. It's going to be harder to run through the boat. And it's also going to be separated. So having it together like this is definitely something I would recommend. Not only are you going to get the marine grade stuff to help out with corrosion and stuff like that, but it will help out with rigging. So we're running 10 gauge marine grade, and we're running that per unit. So if we've got a single unit at the console, we're going to run 10 gauge from the battery. Whether you have a dedicated electronics battery or you're running this all off of your cranking battery, you'll have a positive and a negative running from essentially the battery, and we'll talk about more of the connections in between here in a minute, but all the way up to the factory power cable that comes with your unit. So Brett, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what's in between the battery and the wire, so that way they can get an idea of how this stuff's all rigged up.
Sure. And I think the most important point is when we run dedicated wire, we are running this from the battery to each unit independently. So not going to the dash, splitting off of this 10 gauge wire and running it up, right? I mean, that's kind of the key, is we run 10 gauge to this unit and then a separate 10 gauge to your front unit. Again, on this boat, we just have the 2 units. So we would have 2 wires coming back here hooked up to your battery. And what it's going to look like, so here's some things that we put back here in the battery box. Probably first thing we want to start with is our 10 gauge fuse holder. So each one of these, each 10 gauge wire would have its own fuse holder. And most of the time they're going to come with 5 amp fuses, but here at the shop, every boat we rig up, whether it's live scope, active target, Helix, Lowrance, doesn't matter what unit. If we're running dedicated wire, we put a 7.5 fuse in this fuse holder. Again, this is a 10 gauge fuse holder that you're going to have to purchase. So we would have that in line here. This thing right here, a lot of people have heard of this. It's a Perko Switch. Basically, this is a way to kill your power, right? So it's got an on-off switch. It's got green, red. When it's in green, we now have power to our units. When we're done fishing for the day and we shut all of our units down, we come back here to the back, tying the boat down, doing all this, just reach in, turn this off. Now you know that there's no power draw to your units coming off of that battery. So it's a good way to tie all of your power into one source, go into the battery, and kill power.
Yep. So, and then something that I will mention, the inline fuse holders, this may go without saying for a lot of you guys, but some of you guys are rigging up your boats for the very first time. This is just on the positive side, right? So you're going to run your inline fuse holder on your positive side, and then basically these are going to be connected just like this. So you've got your inline fuse holder connecting you into the Perko switch. Like you said, that's going to allow you to keep that draw off of the battery. It's also going to be good for your onboard charging systems. They will like having that disconnect while it's charging as well. Okay, so we've got our power connector from our unit here, and it's going to come with a pre-installed fuse holder, and we're actually cutting those out at the unit, and we're using the 10 gauge inline fuse holder that we've been talking about basically in place of it. And the main reason we're doing that is so it's easily accessible. It's not buried up under the deck of the boat. You don't have to go crawling up under the console to get to it. It's right here in the bilge compartment next to your battery, and it's easy to get to. If you have a fuse blow, you know where to go. So just in case we didn't cover that, cut this thing out. We're going to run our positive from our graph or our black box or whatever it is to the 10 gauge, and then the fuse holder is going to be at the battery. Whether that's in the back of the boat or you've got a battery up front, you want that fuse holder by the battery.
So no matter how many units you're running, we're going to cut out all the fuses. We're going to put new ones in back by the battery so they're all in one location. Your negatives are then going to run to the negative side of your battery. So that is a good point. So all positives go into your Perko switch, the negatives will go to the negative side of the battery.
And before we get too carried away with all of these specific things that you're going to want to know about rigging, I just would like to mention, and Brett kind of hinted at it a minute ago, this boat we're rigging up 2 graphs. But let's say we were going to run a live scope as well, you know, a live scope or active target, or even a mega live. We're going to run a completely separate 10 gauge marine grade wire up there for that as well. So let's say you have 3 different devices that you're powering up. Once you start adding, because a lot of these boats have 5 units now, is pretty dang common.
Yeah. 4 units in a live scope or an active target or a mega live, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. So this is like your typical 10 gauge ring terminal. So if you used these individually in order to connect to the Perko switch, then you'd have a whole bunch of them stacked up on top of each other. And sometimes it's fine, but sometimes you actually run out of room there. So what we do a lot is we use these bigger butt connectors here, and we will connect 3 different 10 gauge wires all into one ring terminal. I think I said that wrong. I think I might have said
terminal. Yeah.
Yep. So this is a 6 gauge ring terminal. You're going to go ahead and crimp it, and then you're going to solder it, and then we'll run our heat shrink over it to keep it nice and watertight.
Then you can put that just one connection on the back of this. So instead of having 3 of these, we've just got one that ties into that, so saving us some room.
Yep. And then your connection from the Perko switch to the positive battery post, we're going to recommend a 6 gauge. You're going to want to beef that up a little bit. So these little tips right here, these are the ones that you kind of encounter along the way and you just learn from experience. But if you want to be ready to go for the install, we'll make sure we put the links down in the description. But doing stuff like this will help out. You can always get these 10, 12 gauge heat shrink butt connectors. These are definitely our favorite way to connect your 10 gauge power to your power connector on your unit. Mm-hmm. So you're just going to crimp this down, and then you'll heat it up, and it will actually form around the wire, and it has like an adhesive in there that it lets out, and it keeps that nice and watertight. So these are great connectors, whether you're using it as a ring terminal or you're using it to connect 2 wires together. These are great options as well.
And even on these butt connectors, so once we heat shrink that, we'll then let it cool down, and then we'll go ahead and use electrical tape just to add another layer of protection to keep it watertight.
Okay, one quick install tip for running the dedicated power. You've typically got a much smaller gauge wire coming out of the unit. You're seeing these smaller, 14, 16 gauge wires, and we're connecting it to a 10 gauge positive connection, right? So what we're doing is we're using these 10 to 12 gauge heat shrink butt connectors, And what we'll do is once you strip that smaller gauge wire, we'll double it up, and that way you still get a good bite on this bigger butt connector. This bigger butt connector obviously fits on the 10 gauge wire really well, but you're going to need to double up your wire on that smaller gauge side in order to get a real good bite.
So basically everything's going to run back to your Perko switch. This is a way, again, especially if you're running, say, a dedicated battery, this is a way to control your electronics on and off, know that there's no power draw. Even if you were going to your cranking battery, if you decided just the 2 units going to your cranking battery, you could have that all tied in there. And again, it's just a way to know that we can kill power to our units, so that battery's not dying overnight. You leave something on. So it's a very good thing for new installs to do on your boat.
A lot of these newer boats will come pre-rigged with something much like this. A lot of guys in the past have used them for power poles because they tend to have a parasitic draw on them as well. So you may already have one of these in your boat. As long as you're going to be running these electronics to the same battery, you can go ahead and run that new power line through your existing Perko switch as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's pretty much it on running dedicated wire and what it is. Of course, we laid this on top of the boat. We took the easy way out. The hard part is running through the actual boat. But once you get it there, this is how you're going to connect everything up, and you're just going to have better performance out of your units by running this dedicated wire. They're going to last longer. It's a good way if you're running multiple units and all these bigger units that take more juice. This is what we recommend. This is how we run the dedicated wire, 10 gauge, and then all of the accessories here.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more and more important with the advancement in today's electronics, especially with forward-facing sonar. Those modules seem to draw a lot. The bigger units with faster processors and the higher screen resolution, they're all drawing more power. If you are having issues with your unit, power is one of the first things you want to address. We've seen power issues show themselves in some really odd ways, some things that you would swear were interference, or maybe you even thought you had a bad transducer. Come to find out, we've solved a lot of those issues that don't really show themselves as power by running dedicated power. So definitely going to be important in your installs.
Absolutely. And then last tip of the day, just a little bonus tip on the trolling motor side. So we're gonna recommend 6 gauge wire. You run on the trolling motor side, and then we run this 60 amp fuse breaker. That's what we use on the trolling motor side. Something simple like this. You push this button in. You see the red bar come down. You don't have any connectivity. You've negated the power to your trolling motor. When you're ready to go, you flip that back up. Now we know we've got power again, so you don't have power draw overnight. And just another little tip of install of what we do here when we run dedicated wire, whether it be on the trolling motor side or electronic side.
Yep, these are nice. You can get a bunch of different styles, but we actually like this push button one. They do have some out there on the market that don't have that push button. They will only break on their own. Mm-hmm. They don't act as a manual switch. We like this because we're actually using this every time we get off the water. And the 60 amp, like Brett mentioned, is important. A lot of the older trolling motors were running 50 amp breakers, and advancements in trolling motor technology as well has forced us to bump up to that 60 amp circuit breaker. So we'll put a link down in the description so you guys can go grab one of these for yourself.
Yeah, and we'll have links to all of this, right? We'll put the 10 gauge wire, we'll put the Perko switch, all the stuff that we use. There'll be a link in the video below, so you can go check that out.
Yeah, one thing I think that I would like to mention, there's a bunch of pre-built harnesses out there on the market. We don't have a ton of experience with them. We've seen them come into the shop, but I think one important thing, I think there's people out there getting good results with them. I can't really I can't really deny that, right? But they're just not true dedicated power. What I've seen out of a lot of them is they're running a big heavy gauge wire, maybe like an 8 gauge or something like that, up halfway up the boat, and then they're tending to split off that connection 3, 4, 5 different ways. And you're just not going to get the same voltage that you would get by running the true dedicated 10 gauge. So that is something that I would look at. You can buy one of those harnesses, and it'll probably cost you a little more to buy one of those harnesses. This will definitely be a little bit more work, you know, making all your connections and doing the work yourself. But either way, you're going to have to fish that stuff through the boat, which is really the hardest part of this whole rigging job anyways. So you still got the hard part ahead of you. Might as well do the 10 gauge, marine grade, dedicated, and have a true dedicated power system.
Okay, guys. Hopefully this helped you if you're going to install your own, or you're looking to upgrade maybe even 1 or 2 of your units or your whole boat. Hope this helped out. If you guys have any questions, give us a call at 316-313-4113 or shoot us an email at sales@russellmarineproducts.com. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Are you tired of your old marine electronics? At R&P we make trade-in easy. 3 steps. Step 1, shoot us an email, get a quote. Step 2, send us your old unit and get credit. Step 3, get your brand new unit and get it installed on your boat today.